Welcome to episode 83 of the Various and Sundry podcast. I am your host, Matt Harmon, joined live from the Vault Studio on the beautiful campus of Grace College Theological Seminary by my good friend, my colleague, my co-host, and the man who is ready to predict a Jets Super Bowl victory, John Scott Sloat.
I will be making no such prediction today.
Come on, we need a hot take from John Sloat. So we're doing something a little bit different here today.
Yes. I am in Florida on vacation.
When this episode drops.
When it drops, yeah.
We're actually recording this one a mere moments after the previous episode.
Yeah, that's right.
A little behind the curtain look for our listeners here. So we're recording a week out, which means that any sort of sports talk has the potential to be dated. So what we thought we'd do to kind of get things rolling on the front end here is give a little update on our expectations, our hopes for the upcoming football season. But as my co-host has very subtly and helpfully reminded me, I think I forgot to this last episode, so I'm going to blame it on the tile project.
Yes. It doesn't create just a haze over the tiles. It creates a haze over our minds as well.
Indeed. So anyway, if you'd like to connect with the show, you can find us on Twitter at V&S You can email the show variousandsundrypodcast@gmail.com. We do have a Facebook page that has now restarted publishing notices about the episodes when they launch. Various and Sundry Podcast, and you can find us on YouTube as well. So, having said that, let's talk a little football preview, and we'll start with your beloved Jets. What are your hopes, dreams, expectations, fears? Bare your soul to us.
So, a little just generic football talk. I'm interested to see how the new number of games works out.
So 17 games this year.
17 games, 2 preseason though, right?
Yes.
So I'm wondering if those 2 preseason games, how teams play that. Because normally with 4, it was like, goodness, the first string offense would play 1 drive. The second game they'd play a quarter. The third game they'd play into the third quarter.
Right.
And then fourth game, no one played really.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to see how teams play that. Do injuries increase? Do they decrease? How does that work? Technically speaking, it's 1 game off the schedule, I believe entirely, if you count preseason and regular. Yeah. Technically. So I'm interested to see how that all works itself out. It feels weird to say no team will go 8-8 this year. I suppose unless there's a tie, then it's possible.
8-8-1.
8-8-1. So for the Jets specifically, I'm excited to see I almost said Sam Wilson. Wow. Zach Wilson under center and just see, apparently he can spin the ball pretty well. So excited to see him.
Is he going to be the day one starter?
I believe so. Okay. There's no other quarterback on the roster that I would want under center at all over him. Like there's no crafty veteran,
Sure.
There's no Josh McCown or anything like that behind him. So I think he'll be under center day one. I'd like them to pick up a veteran QB who can sort of help him along. Be looking for this. Think about this.
Yeah.
There's been rumors that they've been talking to the Bears about Nick Foles.
He seems to be the guy that everybody is interested in.
Yes.
As that sort of like veteran backup guy.
Yeah. And I'd be okay with that. I'd like somebody there though that can help him along.
Right. I have some mixed feelings about that. Not that I'm a Bears fan, but I do want to see Justin Fields do well. And it's obviously just a matter of time before he's the guy. But I get nervous about starting rookie quarterbacks game one in the NFL. And I think even more so this year with less preseason. That hurts
potentially,
guys like Zach Wilson, Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence. to have fewer reps. Now, I know they're not – it's not like they were playing all 4 preseason games, full games, but it'll be interesting to see how that
Well, it gives them less time to be on a sideline, figure out some of the operating procedures of the team. You know, how do we call plays in? How does the offensive coach like to call the offense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When he gets hyped up in a game situation, he sounds like that. Stuff like that I think is helpful in the preseason.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So other than Zach being under center, they got a second-round pick who had a first-round grade, Elijah Moore, who's made some waves in minicamps and just is like a really explosive receiver slot guy.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see him play a little bit. We're really hoping for a breakout star, obviously. And then, my goodness, I'm really excited about our offensive line. It should be really good. I mean, that's about it. Other than that, I'm expecting the season to be around 500. Not 500, but around 500. And I want to see some of our young talent step up. I want to see some flashes of some potential future greatness. So I think if we could do that, I think we already have 2 first-round draft picks next year.
Okay.
And so if we could do that, I think I'd be pretty pleased with the season overall.
Yeah.
Are those reasonable expectations? It's hard to say.
It's hard to say. As an outsider looking in, we've talked about this, the fact that a lot of the Jets' problems seem to be higher up in the organization as well. Mm-hmm. And so you just wonder, does that just kind of set this ceiling on how well the franchise can do on the field? Barring a sort of dumb luck, just hit the jackpot kind of thing. Like, if Zach Wilson blows up and is, by far the best rookie quarterback in that class and becomes an all-time great, that can be a franchise-changing thing. But it's just hard to know until they make some of those changes on the upper end.
And I think from him specifically, I'm looking for flashes. I expect bad interceptions. I expect he's going to hold onto the ball too long. Stuff like that. Stuff that all rookies seem to do.
Yep.
But if he every now and then it's like, that was a 45-yard rope to a receiver down the sideline.
Yep.
In the 2-minute drill. That's nice.
Yeah, you definitely want to see those flashes for sure. So if I set the over-under on wins for the Jets at exactly
8.
Are you going over or under?
I'll go over by 1. Yes.
So you're thinking 9 and 8.
Yes, and that's the optimist in me coming out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Let's turn our attention to a little college football and your Buckeyes.
So a lot of storylines coming out of Ohio State. Probably the biggest is the fact that they have to replace Justin Fields as their quarterback.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it's been a 3-way quarterback battle in camp, starting in the spring and now going into camp. Odds seem to be favoring a kid named C.J. Stroud. He was the backup last year. Mm-hmm. Did play in some very limited time, in some garbage time. Did not throw a pass. So you have – this is part of what's fascinating is you have a group of quarterbacks at Ohio State, none of whom have thrown a pass in a game.
Wow.
So C.J. Stroud has come in and handed the ball off and actually had a long rushing touchdown in some garbage time, but has not thrown a pass, and neither the other two. So that's a little unsettling going into a season to have a quarterback who's never thrown a pass in a game. Now, having said that, all 3 are, 4-star plus recruits kind of guys. So highly recruited, good quality guys in that sense. And what encourages me, here was one of those signs that I thought, this is actually an encouraging thing. So Ohio State's best receiver is Chris Olave. And he could have left and been a first-round NFL draft pick this past year.
Okay.
He decided to stay. And what that tells me is he must be reasonably confident that whoever the next quarterback is, they're going to get him the ball. And that he's not going to be just a disaster. That it's not going to hurt you to come back and see lower numbers maybe because you've got a new quarterback. And Ohio State has arguably the best set of wide receivers in the country. If you look at a site like Pro Football Focus that runs analytics and that sort of stuff, they rank Ohio State's two best receivers as the two best in the nation. Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson. And they also have an excellent tight end in Jeremy Ruckert. So, a lot of the buzz coming out of the camp has been around, though, an incoming freshman running back named Travion Henderson, one of the highest running back recruits in the country. And you're hearing whispers like by a couple games in, he's going to be the starter.
Really?
As a true freshman. He's just got that pop, that explosiveness.
So forgive my ignorance on Ohio State football. They had some pretty good running backs last year.
Well, they had kind of a two-man platoon system between Master Teague, great name, and he's built like a tank. I mean, he passes the eye test, and Trey Sermon, who was the transfer in from Oklahoma, who started off very slow, and then like the last 3 games, like became the greatest running back in Ohio State history, basically, for those 3 games, where he broke the single game rushing record in the Big Ten championship game. And then ran wild again in the playoff semifinal against Clemson, and then got hurt on the first play of the national championship game, which really hurt Ohio State.
Yeah.
Clarifying, I'm not saying they would have beat Alabama if Trey Sermon was healthy, but it would have been a better game, would have been closer.
Yeah.
In any case. So there's a lot of buzz there. Ohio State needs to fix their secondary. Their secondary was terrible last year. That's an area of concern. They start the season on the road at Minnesota, which is a sneaky, challenging game with a freshman quarterback – or not freshman, but a new quarterback. And then they play Oregon, top 10 team. Play them at home, which is good. So you'll get an early look at how good they are. I think if they can get past those 2 hurdles, they can build into a team that should make the playoff at the end of the year.
So are those 2 running backs still on Ohio State?
Trey Sermon graduated and was drafted by the 49ers.
Okay.
Master Teague is still there. He's more of a workhorse. He doesn't have that explosiveness.
Okay. So he may be the goal line guy, or
I just think he'll be kind of I think he'll get a lot of carries, but I think the difference between him and Henderson will be noticeable just in terms of explosiveness. You never really thought when you handed the ball to Teague, you never thought you kind of thought, well, maybe he could break one, but probably not.
Yeah.
Henderson is the kind of kid that you hand it to him, you go, he could break it any play.
Yeah.
He is that kind of explosiveness.
If the hole collapses, he could bounce it out and take it to the house.
And he's got the speed. Okay. He's got the whole package. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops. I'm looking forward to I am looking forward to the season. I'm not looking forward to what it does to my emotional state. Though eventually, if they change the playoff system to have 12 teams, which seems crazy to me, that takes a little pressure off of those regular season games.
Yeah.
So we'll see how that develops. But
any prediction on record?
I mean, I'm not saying they can't lose to. I can see it as a possibility of them losing to even Minnesota on the road. That's not an easy place to play. They could lose to Oregon. But even though Ohio State has beaten that team up north for almost a decade straight now, fluky things can happen in those games. But my expectation is still for them to run the table.
Okay.
And to win the Big Ten.
Okay. And that would put them in line for a national championship to be in the picture. If
they go unbeaten, they will make the playoff.
Mm-hmm.
There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
If they lose a game in there, then it gets dicey. So we'll see. But optimism, you're more optimistic than I am. I tend to think of what's going to go wrong. So the pessimist in me thinks eventually this great run of Ohio State's got to end. Something fluky will happen. The quarterbacks won't perform. Our secondary won't get better. Those kind of things.
And I think your quarterback situation may be the biggest question mark right now. Is that fair?
They looked good in the spring game, but the spring game's a glorified scrimmage at best kind of thing. So hard to know. But I do have confidence in Ryan Day. I think he's a great play caller. I think he's creative offensively. I think he'll create situations that will build success. That he's not going to be like, all right, we're going to throw the ball 50 times today and force a new quarterback to go through 3-4 reads and find a guy. I think early it's going to be a lot of 1 read, 2 read, go kind of thing, and try to simplify things for them.
Okay,
so that's my hope at least.
All right. Well, we ready to move on to our main topic?
I think so.
We got 15 minutes out of sports without without having anything live happening.
Well, you can get both of us going on our favorite football teams.
Yeah, absolutely.
Early in the season, before the season when you have all these hopes and dreams and expectations. But what is our main topic for today, John?
We're talking about the Good Samaritan passage, Luke 10.
Yeah. So, and really the reason we're doing this is some of our listeners probably have heard me mention this, but I'm writing a commentary on the Gospel of Luke, which is a pretty massive undertaking, and just recently finished working through chapter 10. And the Good Samaritan comes towards the end of chapter 10. And when I proposed this as a topic, you thought, well, I've taught on this as well. You've taught on this a couple times, different contexts. So I thought it might be nice for us to just kind of work through this passage and pull out some things that I think are worth noting, and then maybe move towards some points of application and just kind of thinking through how it applies. So do you want to read it or do you want me to read it?
I can give it a read here.
Okay.
I have it on my
So this is Luke 10, starting verse 25 and going through verse 37.
Okay. And behold, a lawyer stood up to put him, Jesus, to the test, saying, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" And he answered, "You shall love your God. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have answered correctly. Do this and you will live." But he, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed on the other side. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. He went to him, bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine, and then set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, 'Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back.' Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among robbers?" He said, "The one who showed him mercy." And Jesus said to him, "You go and do likewise."
All right. Yeah, I mean, fascinating passage, and obviously one that's very well known, even among people who are not necessarily church-going folk or were raised necessarily in a Christian context. A lot of people are familiar with the parable of the Good Samaritan.
Sure, it's made its way. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, we talked about Seinfeld And
Yeah.
we talked about the final episode of Seinfeld, and they get in trouble for a Good Samaritan law.
Right. That in the episode, the town had passed a law requiring people to come to the aid of someone in need. Mm-hmm. And so even, you think about, we associate that term Samaritan generally positively.
Sure.
I mean, there are whole, hospital networks and medical conglomerates with the name Samaritan in them, like Good Samaritan. So
Good Samaritan. Samaritan's Purse is something out there.
Isn't that Franklin Graham's
Maybe.
Ministry, I think? Yeah. So it can be helpful for us to sort of go back and look at, in that original context, for Jesus to make the Samaritan the hero of the story would have been a stunning turn of events. Mm-hmm. It would have been completely unexpected because of the long history of animosity between the Jewish people and the Samaritans. And so just to give a very brief, there's a lot here. But the Samaritans were essentially the offspring, the descendants of – so when the nation of Israel split into two, you had the northern kingdom of Israel, you had the southern kingdom of Judah.
Jeroboam, Rehoboam.
There you go. The northern kingdom was conquered by the Assyrians in 722 BC, and many of them were taken off into exile in Assyria. Some of them were left behind in the land. Mm-hmm. And so the king of Assyria then decided, we're going to send other people to live in the land in the northern kingdom, what used to be the northern kingdom, and they intermarried and produced children that basically were, from a Jewish perspective at the time, half-breeds. They're only half Jewish, and they developed their own sort of syncretistic form of religion, sort of taking parts of what God had revealed to the Israelites and then merging it with other pagan practices and such. So they eventually became their own distinct entity. And throughout centuries, there was hostility between these two groups. And I was even just in prep for this. So, Jesus is doing ministry around 30 A.D. There was an incident in around the year 9 A.D., so 20 years before this, where a group of Samaritans had entered into the temple courts at night during Passover and spread dead bones throughout the temple complex.
Which would make the very strict Jewish people. That's
right. That's an act of defiling the temple.
Right,
basically.
right. That would make them unclean. It would make certainly the temple unclean.
Right. Now, of course, 100 plus years before that, the Jews had destroyed the Samaritan temple altogether. So plenty of blame to go around on both sides of that conflict. So to make the Samaritan the hero is pretty striking.
Mm-hmm. Even provocative in this time. Yeah.
Indeed. And in fact, you notice that when Jesus asked the question at the end, which of these three showed himself to be a neighbor, the lawyer, the legal expert in the Jewish law, can't bring himself to say the Samaritan. He just says, the one who showed him mercy.
Yeah.
Won't even utter the name Samaritan in his response.
Yeah. And I think it's important. I think we have a connotation of the word lawyer as well, that where it's like somebody we pay an exorbitant fee to do legal stuff for us.
Right.
This was more theologian even.
Yes.
Than
essentially a biblical scholar.
Yeah, more than an
expert in the Jewish law. Yeah. That's why. Yeah, I'm not a fan of translating that lawyer, because I think of those connotations in our current context. People think attorney. I want to sue someone. I need an attorney, or I'm getting sued.
I need an attorney. Yeah.
So, and then it's also interesting. You've got that road between Jerusalem and Jericho, well known for its dangers. It descends something like 3,000 feet from Jerusalem to Jericho.
Yeah.
It's winding.
Yeah, and Jerusalem always sits up on a hill, so you always go up to Jerusalem, and when you leave Jerusalem, you come down from it.
Correct.
And I think we took a bus ride from Jericho to Jerusalem, and it is quite steep.
Yes, it is. And it would be easy for robbers to hide in certain areas where you could easily surprise someone. So in this parable you've got – this would have been a situation that everyone hearing the parable would have said either, oh, I know someone that happened to, or they were traveling and they got stopped by robbers and they got their possessions taken, or they got beaten up or something like
Sure.
that. So would not have been surprising. What is perhaps surprising is that you have both the priest and the Levite literally going out of their way to avoid this injured man who is by the side of the road, half dead. And so it highlights the lack of compassion versus the Samaritan who shows compassion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So anything else as you think about some of the key features, background kind of stuff, as you've kind of looked at this parable?
Man, I was going to bring up the dead bones in the temple thing. I said that when I preached this passage in chapel here. My goodness, not any that come to mind. Okay. I think we've hit relatively strongly that there's a lot of animosity here.
Sure, and I will point out that I think it's possible to misinterpret this parable in several different directions. But one is, so the lawyer asks the question, what do I need to do to inherit eternal life? And if you don't read this carefully, you could come to the mistaken conclusion that Jesus basically says, be a good neighbor, and then you get eternal life.
Yeah.
And that's not what he's saying. In essence, he is exposing the lawyer for his lack of understanding of what it means to love your neighbor as a way of helping him to come to realize his need for Christ.
Yes. The lawyer is trying to by the way, I'll mention that the lawyer totally skips over love the Lord your God with all your heart,
right.
soul, and mind. I don't know if you put much emphasis on that as much.
Right.
But
because he thinks he's probably got that one down.
He's got that covered.
Yeah.
He's a theologian, right? But who is my neighbor? He's trying to narrow that down.
Yes.
He's trying to say, okay, is it the people next to me, houses who are next to me? Is it people in my neighborhood? Is it my small town? Who right. is this?
Right. And as an expert in the Jewish law, he would have probably held to the view that it just applies to his fellow Jews.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you look at the original context where that quote comes from, it's Leviticus 19, where you've got the love your neighbor as yourself. It's in the context of God explaining to the Israelites how they're supposed to treat their fellow Israelites.
Mm-hmm.
So at one level, there's a contextual argument that you can say he's right, but here's the difference. If you keep reading on in Leviticus, in the very same chapter, maybe it's the next one over, the Israelites are commanded to treat the aliens and sojourners, the foreigners among them, on the same basis.
Interesting.
And so it's, the legal expert could come in and say, well, look at the immediate context. And Jesus could have said, yeah, but if you look at the little bit broader context, you see that same standard is applied to the foreigners living among you, that you're supposed to love them as yourself. So you can't get around it just on the sort of ethnic level of, well, it just applies to my fellow Jew. It doesn't apply to one of those half-breeds.
Interesting.
As the Samaritans. So I think that's a helpful piece to look at there in terms of what Jesus is getting at. And doesn't it just speak to there's a sense in which when you really feel the weight of some of God's commands, isn't one of our natural inclinations to go, all right, so what are the boundaries on that?
Mm-hmm.
What's the escape hatch on that?
How do I make that manageable?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And in one sense, that's part of what the law is supposed to do, is help you to see it places upon you this the totality of its weight to help you see, I can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
I have no hope. If it depends on me obeying that perfectly, I don't have a chance. So that's a big piece of, I think, what in part Jesus is doing there is to help us to see that. And There's obviously, I think, more details in the text that we could dive into, but I think it might be helpful for us to move into thinking about application. What does this look like for us moving forward? How do we as followers of Jesus apply it today?
Yeah, and I think what you just said is a huge takeaway, right? That when we come to the end of this, we go, so it's not just people I live around. It's just not people that I regularly associate with. It's even people I dislike are my neighbor, and I need to love them as I love myself.
Right.
I don't have the power for that.
Right.
I need the help of the empowering of the Spirit to even come close to beginning to do that.
Yeah. And I think, too, that it is helpful to notice here that we can get into some trouble, I think, when – well, trouble's the wrong word. It can feel overwhelming. Living in such a connected world that we live in today, you're reading through your social media feed and you see, oh my gosh, there's this famine in some country in Africa. And your heart is legitimately moved and you think, okay, am I obligated to help with that? Should I send money to help relief agencies with that? And of course, that can be a good impulse, and maybe you should. Mm-hmm. But it can be easy to feel overwhelmed with our awareness of all the needs in the world. And so I think it can be helpful to recognize that there is a proximity issue in terms of neighbor, meaning that the primary focus is your neighbor is someone who is near to you. Mm-hmm. And so you have a greater obligation, I think, to be more involved in meeting of needs of people that are in that kind of close proximity to you, whether that's in the church, whether that's in your physical neighborhood, wherever you live. Not that completely gets you off the hook for, I just worry about my community and my little town, and then I have no consideration for other parts of the world.
Sure.
But I think for the overly sensitive conscience, some people can just feel overwhelmed with there's all these needs in the world, and I only have this much resources. Like, how can I possibly love that neighbor and love this neighbor? I want to help that person say,
sure,
it's okay. God doesn't call you to meet every single need you're made aware of. Even though that's a good impulse.
That's a good impulse, but there's a nearness principle there, or something where dealing in your immediate context as you go.
And I would also point out here that this sort of ethnic and racial animosity is there in this passage.
Absolutely.
And it reminds us that that racism and prejudice is as old as I think, as you said the other day, as old as the Tower of Babel. At least.
as old as Babel. Yeah.
And we're not going to dive into the topic of race per se here, but I think it's helpful sometimes in our American context. Mm-hmm. We have such an American take on race and racial issues that we lose sight of this being a far more fundamental human problem of there is ethnic and racial prejudice that's directed in all directions. It just looks different by country and culture. You go to other countries and you go, oh, well, this group hates this group. And it's not black and white. It's some other combination of ethnic divide.
Sure. I remember being in the country of Kyrgyzstan, and I just remember, the Kyrgyz hate the Uzbeks and the Uzbeks hate the Kyrgyz. Why?
Yeah. Well, and
beats me.
Yeah, and it probably goes back so far beyond
Yeah.
even human memory at this point that it's just embedded within those two different cultures that they dislike each other. Mm-hmm. And there's probably reason for that way back, some sort of battle, some sort of territorial dispute, something's there. But if you ask those people today, why do you hate them? They probably can't even necessarily articulate it. It's part of the air they breathe in the culture they were raised in.
Yeah.
So I think that's
it's part of our human sin issue.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think to address it, it has to be dealt with at that level. Mm-hmm. So anything else you wanted to hit on here, or are we ready to move on? Any last thoughts on the goods? I mean, there's tons here, obviously.
Yeah, there's a ton here.
If you wait a few years, my commentary will come out, and then that'll solve all your problems. But said tongue-in-cheek, of course. I will want to mention, if you're interested in the parables, by the way, and maybe have we done an episode on the parables?
No, we should.
Maybe we should, yeah.
You thinking Snodgrass?
Yeah. That's a great resource. There's a resource by a scholar named Klein Snodgrass.
Yeah.
Fabulous name. It's called Stories with Intent, a comprehensive guide to the parables. It's a great reference guide for teaching or studying the parables. I highly recommend it. It's something that's worth adding to your library.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
All right, so we are in episode 83, and we need an athlete, John.
Yeah, let me run us through who we have on the list here. Ted Hendricks.
Yes. I have some info about him, yes.
Yeah, go for it.
So in doing research for the pod, so he was a linebacker primarily for the Raiders, long history with the Raiders. He was 6'7".
Wow.
That's really tall for a linebacker, even today.
Yeah.
Linebackers tend to be more in that like 6'2 to 6'5 range, maybe. And he blocked 25 field goals in his NFL career.
Just because he just had an extra couple inches. Yeah.
Yeah. So that just fascinated me. Like I can't confirm that, but that has to be an NFL record. Who's blocked more than 25 field goals?
Yeah, I have no idea.
6'7" linebacker. He played from 69 to 83.
All right. Andre Reed.
Yeah, you remember?
Not Andy Reid.
No.
Andre.
No. Andre Reed. Do you remember him? Played for the Bills primarily.
Maybe.
From 95. That's a typo there. There you go. I think he ended his career in around the year 2000, but was part of those Bills teams.
Okay.
Jim Kelly was one of Jim Kelly's primary targets there in Buffalo. And then Mark Clayton.
I know that name.
He was a wide receiver for the Dolphins primarily, and he was part of what was called the Marks Brothers. You remember? This is before your time.
Yeah.
But Dan Marino had two wide receivers, Mark Clayton and Mark Duper, I think. Duper or Dupree, something like that.
Okay.
So they were called the Marks Brothers. Dynamic wide receiver for the Dolphins.
Willie Gault?
Gault, yeah. Raiders and Bears, and was primarily a track star who was turned into a football player, like almost Olympic level kind of track star kind of thing. And then for Ohio State, Terry Glenn, wide receiver from 93 to 95, won the Biletnikoff Award in 1995 as the nation's best wide receiver, played for the Patriots, was one of the best wide receivers in Ohio State history by far. And sadly, he died in a drunk driving accident.
Where he was hit by a drunk driver?
No, he unfortunately was impaired and died in a car accident.
That's sad. Yeah.
So, who's jumping out to you there?
Honestly, Ted Hendricks.
Yeah, it's hard to beat the 6'7" and blocking 25 field goals.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah, so let's go Ted Hendricks.
Ted Hendricks it is.
All right, one thing you liked.
Well, we're recording early, so when this drops, I am on vacation in St. Augustine, Florida. So St. Augustine, Florida is the one thing I like. Okay, yes. So by faith, you're announcing. I suppose, yeah. I'm going to do a similar thing since we're going a week out. So when this drops, the previous week before this, I will have had opportunity to see Zach from Ohio and Nate from Ohio. Yeah, they're both staying with you. Yes. So it'll be good to see them. So I am confidently selecting that as my one thing I liked in advance, even though it hasn't happened yet. But I'm confident on that. All right. So we've done our football preview of our favorite teams for the upcoming season. We've talked the Good Samaritan. We have selected a 6'7" linebacker who blocked 25 field goals as our athlete for the episode. Way to go, Ted. And by faith, we have expressed our one thing we liked as vacation and catching up with friends. Mm-hmm.
So I think by definition, we have covered our various and sundry topics. And all that's left to say is mission accomplished. And so until next time, the Lord bless y'all real good.
Later.